The corridor outside Council Chamber 7 was built to intimidate. 72 meters from floor to ceiling, polished obsidian walls that caught no warmth and returned no reflection, only a distorted, wavering shadow of whoever stood before them, stretched and twisted until they barely recognized themselves. The floor was the same obsidian, polished to a mirror shine that showed the ceiling above and the frightened faces below. The light panels were calibrated to the visual spectrum of the species who had designed the station 800 years ago, the Vireni hegemony, who saw best in cold blue frequencies that made every other species look slightly ill, slightly washed out, slightly lesser. The effect was intentional. Every detail of Station Primus had been designed to remind the 412 species who gathered here that they were guests in a Vireni house. The ceilings were too high. The seats were too low. The air was slightly too cold for most species, slightly too dry for others, slightly too something for everyone except the Vireni themselves. Elias Vance had walked this corridor 311 times over 31 years. He had attended 311 sessions of the Galactic Council as a representative of humanity, first as a junior logistics attaché, then as a full delegate, then as ambassador, and finally, after the armistice, as simply Coordinator Vance, because the title of ambassador felt like a lie when your species was no longer considered a full voting member. He knew every replaced floor panel, every scratch in the obsidian, every flicker in the cold blue lights, the way the third panel from the door dimmed slightly every 47 seconds, the way the seventh panel had a hairline fracture that caught the light at certain angles, the way the temperature dropped exactly 1.2 degrees Celsius at the halfway point, because the heating system had been designed for Vireni biology and simply didn't reach that far. That was what logistics people did. They saw systems, they noticed when a system changed, they tracked the small failures so the large failures never happened. A logistics coordinator who didn't notice a flickering light panel was a logistics coordinator who didn't notice a cargo container that was 0.3 degrees warmer than it should be. And a cargo container that was 0.3 degrees warmer than it should be was a cargo container full of spoiled medicine or melted electronics, or in the worst case, Elias had ever seen decomposing bodies that should have been frozen. He sat on a bench designed for a species with 3 additional hip joints. The Vireni again, though the bench was actually a later addition, installed 200 years ago when the Council realized that not every species could stand for 6-hour sessions. The bench was too high for human legs, too narrow for human hips, and angled in a way that put pressure on exactly the wrong part of a human spine. Elias had learned to sit on it anyway. He'd learned to sit on it for 6 hours at a time, to smile through the pain, to nod along with debates that bored him and rulings that infuriated him, to never let the Vireni see him wince. Today, his knees hurt too much to pretend. The photograph was warm in his hands. Not literally warm, it was printed on old-fashioned polymer stock, the kind Earth had stopped manufacturing in 2047 because someone decided digital memory crystals were more efficient. The polymer had yellowed with age. The edges were soft from 31 years of being handled, folded, unfolded, tucked into pockets, pressed against chests, pulled out in quiet moments when no one was watching. But it had been against his body for 31 years. His own heat had done what sunlight used to do. The colors had shifted toward sepia, the faces had softened, and the polymer had absorbed something of him, his warmth, his worry, his stubborn refusal to let go. 12 faces. 23 years old, all of them. Earth military fatigues, the old pattern with the digital woodland camouflage that had been obsolete even then, replaced twice over by newer patterns that were replaced again before anyone bothered to learn their names. They were standing in front of a cargo container on some forgotten tarmac, Guam, maybe, or Diego Garcia, or one of the old bases in the South Pacific that had been used as forward supply depots during the last wars before humanity reached the stars. His own face was third from the left, grinning. He'd had all his original teeth then, and no gray in his hair, and no limp in his walk, and he hadn't known what a body bag smelled like after 3 days in a vacuum. He touched the face next to his, Maria Chen. Maria had been the one who figured out the loading algorithm. Before her, logistics was chaos, ships left half-empty, supplies arrived in the wrong order, colonies starved, while warehouses rusted. She'd spent 18 months building a system that treated every container, every ship, every route as part of a single mathematical equation. She'd called it the Chen Cascade, though she hated the name and refused to say it out loud. Everyone else called it that anyway. She died at 47, delivering plasma conduits through a contested zone during the Second Vireni War. Her ship had taken a hit to the cargo bay. The conduits were unstable. She'd gone back in to stabilize them while the rest of the crew evacuated. The conduits arrived. The colony survived. Maria didn't. He touched another face, David Park. David had been the youngest in the photograph, 22, actually, though he'd lied about his age to get into the program. He'd been a genius with routing protocols, the kind of person who could look at a map of 47 supply routes and see the one inefficiency everyone else had missed. He'd died at 39, crushed by a cargo container that shifted during hard burn. He'd kept his hand on the release valve until the container was secure, because if it had broken loose, it would have taken the whole ship. The ship made it. David didn't. Jana Okonkwo, 44, radiation poisoning after a shielding failure. She'd finished her shift and filed her reports before she collapsed, because that was what you did. The reports were immaculate. The next shift knew exactly what had happened, why it had happened, and how to prevent it from happening again. Suleiman Paz, 52, reactor hit. Diverted power from life support to engines because the grain had to get there on time. The grain arrived. The colony ate. Suleiman's last transmission was a weather report for the landing zone. Ilya's finger moved across the photograph, touching each face in turn, naming them silently, honoring them in the only way he knew how, by remembering. 11 of the 12 were dead now. He was the only one still breathing. Sana would tell me to stop counting, he said quietly to no one. The corridor was empty except for him and the cold blue lights and the distorted shadows on the obsidian walls. She'd say the numbers don't help anymore. Sana Yusuf was 71 now. She'd been in that photograph 2/4 from the left, her hair in a tight braid, her eyes already carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd seen a supply line fail and watched the children starve. She was the only other survivor from the photograph, though survivor was doing a lot of work. She'd lost her left arm to a Vireni boarding party in 96. She'd lost her husband to a supply raid in 99. She'd lost her youngest daughter to a logistics accident in 2003, a cargo container that fell, a safety cable that snapped, a body that was never recovered. She was in the gallery upstairs. So were 16 other logistics officers from the original network. Average age, 69. Average years of service, 34. Average number of times they'd been told to quit and refused, uncountable. Elias had tried to count once. He'd gotten to 1,200 before he realized the number didn't matter. The number was every time. The number was as many times as it took. Footsteps. Not footsteps, exactly. The Vireni didn't walk so much as flow. Their 3 sets of joints allowing a smooth undulation that made other species look clunky and graceless by comparison. The sound was a soft triple click on the obsidian floor, like someone tapping 3 different keys on a keyboard in sequence, followed by a whisper of carapace against air as their 6 limbs moved in perfect coordination. Elias didn't look up. Ambassador Vance. Coordinator Vance, he said, still studying the photograph. Haven't been an ambassador since the armistice. Haven't wanted to be. Ambassador Thavas, of the Vireni hegemony, settled onto the bench beside him. Settled was the wrong word. Thavas attempted to fold his lower body into the bench's contours, failed, because the bench was designed for Vireni anatomy, but that didn't mean it was comfortable, and arranged himself with the kind of practiced grace that suggested he'd been practicing for this specific moment for some time. His carapace was the deep blue-black of senior hegemony officials, not the bright blue of youth or the purple-black of the elderly, but the exact shade that said I have authority and I intend to use it. The shade that said I have been maneuvering for this vote for 8 months and I am going to win. His eyes, all 6 of them, arranged in 2 rows of 3 across his face, were a pale amber that suggested alertness, intelligence, and a complete lack of warmth. "I find the title suits you," Thavas said. His translator carried a warmth that wasn't in his actual vocalizations. The Vireni communicated partly through pheromones, partly through subtle shifts in carapace color, and partly through a spoken language that sounded like stones being ground together, harsh, percussive, full of stops and clicks that human vocal cords couldn't reproduce. The translator smoothed out the grinding and added a patina of diplomatic courtesy that was entirely artificial. "You represent your species with a dignity that exceeds your species' standing." Elias touched Maria Chen's face on the photograph. "That's a very polite way of saying we're primitive." "I meant no offense." "No," Elias agreed. "You meant exactly that offense. You just dressed it in nicer clothes." Thavas's carapace flickered, a flash of amber quickly suppressed. Surprise. He wasn't used to humans reading his species tells. Most species couldn't see the color shifts at all, and the ones who could usually didn't understand them. But Elias had been watching Vireni for 31 years. He'd learned to read their carapace the way he read cargo manifests, carefully, systematically, looking for the discrepancies that told the real story. "The vote convenes in 14 minutes, Thavas said, redirecting. The amber flicker was gone, replaced by the deep blue-black of composure. "I wanted to offer you a final courtesy." Elias turned the photograph slightly, catching the cold blue light. The faces of the dead seemed to glow for a moment, Maria's steady gaze, David's shy smile, Jana's determined jaw, Suleiman's kind eyes. Then the light shifted, and they were just old polymer again. "A courtesy." "Surrender the logistics network now. Transfer the routing protocols, the warehouse coordinates, the supply schedules, the maintenance schedules, the personnel files, all of it, to hegemony oversight." Thavas's mandibles moved in a pattern that Elias had learned meant reasonable offer, though it looked like aggression to most species. "Your people will retain their colonies. Their industrial capacity will be managed, not dismantled. Their supply lines will be maintained, not severed. Their children will eat." He let that sit for a moment. "Continued resistance serves no one, coordinator. Your supply ships are slow, average speed 0.07 c, which is less than half the hegemony's standard. Your routing algorithms are primitive. You still use human-designed protocols from before first contact. Your personnel are old. Your average logistics officer is 67 years old, which is retirement age for every other species in this council." He paused. His carapace shifted to a lighter blue, the color of confidence. "Your species does not know how to quit. That is not a strength. That is a pathology. A species that cannot quit cannot negotiate. A species that cannot negotiate cannot survive. You will break yourselves against the hegemony's patience, and when you break, we will be there to pick up the pieces." Elias looked at the photograph. Maria, who died at 47. David, 39. Jana, 44. Suleiman, 52. Elena Vasquez, 41. She wasn't in the photograph. She'd joined later, but he thought of her anyway. Radiation. Same incident as Jana, different compartment. She'd made it to the airlock before she collapsed. The medics said she'd had a 73% chance of survival if she'd evacuated immediately. She'd stayed to seal the reactor instead. Chenwei, 36. Cargo container fell on him during an offload. Safety cable snapped. The investigation found a manufacturing defect in the cable, a flaw that had been there for 20 years, waiting for the wrong combination of weight and stress. Chen was the wrong combination. Margaret O'Brien, 59, heart attack during a supply run. The ship's medic said she'd been ignoring symptoms for months. Her last log entry said cargo secured, proceeding to destination, ETA 14 hours. She died 4 hours later. The ship arrived on time. Elias had watched all of them die. Not literally, he hadn't been there for every death, hadn't seen the cargo container fall on Chen or the radiation take Elena, but he'd felt every death. He'd signed every notification letter. He'd attended every funeral or sent a representative when the funeral was on a colony too far away for him to reach. He was 73 years old. He had outlived 11 of the 12 people in the photograph. He had outlived 1,847 logistics personnel in the last year alone. He had outlived 11,423 civilians over 31 years, the ones who died because a supply line failed, because a delivery was late, because a cargo container didn't arrive. And Thavas wanted to talk about quitting. Thavas, Elias said, how long have you been maneuvering for this vote? 8 months, 13 days. And in that time, did anyone from my office ever contact your office to ask for terms? Thavas's scent receptors flattened, 2 small pits on either side of his face that flared open when he was surprised, closed when he was calculating, and remained perfectly still when he was lying. They remained perfectly still now. That is not relevant. It's the only thing that's relevant. Elias stood. His left knee made a sound like paper tearing, a ligament probably or cartilage, something that had been worn down by 31 years of standing on cold floors and walking long corridors and refusing to show weakness. He didn't flinch. He'd learned not to flinch. You've been preparing for this vote for 8 months. You've been maneuvering, lobbying, making deals, calling in favors. And in all that time, not once did we ask for terms. Thavas's carapace flickered again, amber, then a flash of red that was almost anger, then back to blue-black. I assumed it was pride. Pride is what you feel when you win. Pride is the thing that makes you stand up straight after a victory and say, we did that. Pride is the thing that makes you want to brag. Elias tucked the photograph into his jacket pocket against his chest, where it had lived for 31 years. This isn't pride, this is something else. Then what is it? Elias considered the question. He'd been asked it before, by reporters, by diplomats, by young officers who just watched their first convoy get hit and wanted to know why they were still loading cargo containers at 4 in the morning, why they were still doing the math, why they were still running the routes when the routes kept killing people. He'd never found an answer that satisfied him. He'd tried duty, but that sounded like a speech. He'd tried responsibility, but that sounded like a lecture. He'd tried love, but that sounded like a lie, because love was for families and partners and children, not for cargo containers and supply schedules and the cold math of logistics. But he found an answer now. Maybe because Thavas had asked the question at the right time, in the right place, with the right tone of condescending certainty. Maybe because the photograph was warm against his chest and the dead were watching and he was tired of carrying their weight alone. Have you ever watched a supply line fail, Thavas? He didn't wait for an answer. Not a simulation, not a report, not a briefing where someone shows you numbers on a screen and you nod and say, I understand. Actually watch it happen. Stand in a colony that's run out of food and watch the children's faces as they realize there's nothing left. Thavas's mandibles shifted, discomfort or distaste. His carapace darkened to a deep purple, the color Vireni showed when they wanted to end a conversation. I have not had that experience. I have. New Mumbai 94. Raider attack took out the water processors 3 days before the tanker was due. 3 days, that's all. If the tanker had arrived on time, no one would have died. But it didn't. The raiders hit the relay station, the tanker got delayed, and by the time it arrived, we'd lost 211 people. Elias' voice was quiet, calm, the voice of someone who had told this story before, to himself, in the dark, when sleep wouldn't come. 140 of them were under 12. He let that land. You see the children first. They're the ones who go quiet. Adults cry, complain, fight, bargain, scream, pray. Children just stop. They run out of energy to be children. They sit against walls and watch you with eyes that know something you don't want to know. He looked at Thavas, really looked at him, not at his carapace or his 6 eyes or his diplomatic posturing, but at the creature underneath all of it. We don't know how to quit because we've seen what happens when we do, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So you keep loading containers, you keep running routes. You keep doing the math, even when the math says you're probably going to die, because the alternative is watching children go quiet. He started walking toward the chamber doors. 14 meters tall, carved with the seals of every species in the council, 412 of them, arranged in order of first contact with the Vireni hegemony. Humanity's seal was small, near the bottom, added late. It was a simple circle with a stylized earth in the center, surrounded by the words, Unum ex multis, one of many. Elias had always hated that motto. Thavas rose, flowed, really, his body unfolding from the bench, in a motion that should have been graceful and somehow wasn't, because he was off balance for the first time in their conversation. His carapace was a confused mess of colors, amber, red, blue, purple, flickering so fast that Elias could barely track them. "You're walking into a vote you cannot win," Thavas called after him. His translator crackled. His actual vocalizations were too harsh, too fast, the stones grinding together with real anger now. "The hegemony has 47 votes committed. You have 12. The math is not on your side." Elias didn't stop walking. "Math is all that's on my side, Thavas. You just don't know what math I've been doing." The chamber doors loomed ahead. 14 meters of carved obsidian, reinforced with Virani alloy that could withstand a direct hit from a ship's main cannon. They were designed to be opened by Virani hands, 3 separate pressure plates at different heights, requiring 3 limbs to activate simultaneously. Elias had learned to open them 29 years ago, after watching a Virani guard refuse to help him for 10 minutes. He hit the plates in sequence, low, middle, high, and the doors swung inward with a groan that sounded like the station itself was protesting. The chamber beyond was vast. 412 seats arranged in concentric semicircles, rising up from the central floor like the tiers of an ancient amphitheater. The Virani sat at the top, the oldest species, the most powerful, the ones who had built this station and wrote its rules. Humanity sat near the bottom, close to the central floor, in seats that had been designed for smaller species and then filled with humans anyway. The lights were the same cold blue as the corridor. The air was the same too cold, too dry, too Virani air. The seats were the same too high, too narrow, too uncomfortable seats. Elias had spent 31 years in this room. Today might be his last day in it. If the vote went against them, and it probably would, because 47 votes was a lot and 12 was not enough, the hegemony would dismantle humanity's industrial capacity. They'd take the supply lines, they'd take the warehouses, they'd take the routing protocols and the maintenance schedules and the personnel files. They'd take everything Elias and Maria and David and Jana and Suleiman and the 1,847 logistics personnel lost in the last year alone had spent their lives building. And they'd call it a courtesy. A guard stepped forward, Zarali, species designation, avian, gender, irrelevant to the story. Her head feathers were raised in the Zarali equivalent of a neutral expression, though Elias had learned that Zarali head feathers were never truly neutral. They were always saying something if you knew how to read them. Coordinator Vance. Her voice was a soft chirp, translated into standard through an implant rather than a handheld device. Your delegation has been assigned gallery seating. Protocol requires that you and your staff remain in the designated area until called upon. I know the protocol, Elias said. He pulled out his datapad, a battered thing, 30 years old, held together with tape and stubbornness. The screen was cracked in 3 places. The battery lasted about 40 minutes on a full charge. The operating system was 2 versions out of date. I wrote half of it. He tapped a single key. A soft chime echoed from somewhere inside the chamber, then another. Then a cascade of chimes, like rain on a metal roof, as 47 separate data packets arrived at the Council's public archive server in less than 3 seconds. The Zarali guard's head feathers shot straight up, surprise or alarm or both. What was that? Public records request. Elias slipped the datapad back into his jacket next to the photograph. Council Regulation 47, Section 3, Paragraph 2. Any delegate may file documentary evidence with the public archive prior to a vote, provided the evidence pertains directly to the matter under consideration. That's 47 documents, 47 service records, 1 for each colony the hegemony wants to dismantle. Elias met the guard's eyes. Well, Zarali had 1 central eye and 2 smaller ones on either side, and it was never clear which one you were supposed to look at. He looked at the middle one. Regulation 47 doesn't specify a maximum length or a maximum number of attachments. The guard's feathers settled slowly, though not all the way. They stayed at a 45-degree angle that Elias had learned meant respectful concern. Coordinator, that's going to take hours to process. The vote is in 11 minutes. Yes. Elias nodded. I know. He walked past her into the chamber. The seats were filling up. Delegates from 412 species, arranged in their tiers, speaking in a dozen different languages that the translators sorted into a constant low hum of background noise. The Vireni sat at the top, looking down at everyone else with the calm certainty of species who had never lost a vote they cared about winning. Ambassador Thavas had taken his seat in the hegemony's primary position, elevated, central, designed to look down on everyone else. His carapace was the deep blue-black of composure again, all traces of flickering color suppressed. His 6 eyes were fixed on the human delegation's empty seats. Elias walked to his own seat, near the bottom, close to the central floor, next to the delegation from the Zerali Concordance and across from the representatives of the fragmented Cathar collective. The seat was too high for his knees and too narrow for his hips. He sat down anyway. He had 11 minutes. He pulled out the photograph one more time. 12 faces, 23 years old, all dead except him. One more time, he said quietly to Maria and David and Jana and Suleiman and all the others. One more vote, then I'll come home. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But Elias felt something in his chest, not warmth, not comfort, not hope, something harder, something that had been forged in supply depots and cargo bays and the cold corridors of stations like this one. Something that refused to quit. He tucked the photograph away, straightened his jacket, and waited for the vote to begin. The council president raised a single limb. Not a hand. The Vireni didn't have hands. They had manipulators, 6-fingered and jointed in 3 places, capable of delicate work and crushing force in equal measure. The president's carapace was the pale blue of extreme age, over 400 standard years, by Vireni reckoning, and his voice, when he spoke, was the grinding of stones that had been grinding for centuries. The question before the assembly is whether the Vireni hegemony's motion to dismantle and assume control of human outer colony industrial capacity shall proceed. Elias watched the delegates shift in their seats. Some were bored, some were nervous, some were calculating odds, running numbers, figuring out which side would win and how to position themselves for the aftermath. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself more times than he could count. The motion requires a simple majority. Voting will proceed in order of species seniority, beginning with the hegemony itself. Thavas rose. His carapace was the deep blue-black of certainty. His 6 eyes swept the chamber, not looking at the delegates, because he didn't need to. He knew their votes. He'd spent 8 months and 13 days securing them. Delegates, Thavas said, I will be brief. He was never brief. Elias had sat through 73 speeches by Thavas over the years, and not one of them had been brief, but Thavas understood theater. He understood that a short speech before a vote you were going to win felt confident, decisive, inevitable. The human species has occupied a seat in this council for 31 standard years. In that time, they have demonstrated admirable resilience. They have survived wars, famines, and supply crises that would have broken lesser species. His mandibles shifted, the Vireni gesture for but. Resilience is not competence. Survival is not efficiency. The human logistics network is a patchwork of primitive technologies and outdated protocols. It consumes resources at 3 times the efficiency ratio of the hegemony's own network. It loses 7.2% of its cargo to spoilage, damage, or misdirection, compared to the hegemony's 1.8%. It operates at a fraction of our speed, a fraction of our capacity, a fraction of our reliability. He paused. His carapace flickered, just a flash, just a hint of the color that meant this is the important part. The hegemony does not seek to destroy humanity. We seek to improve humanity. Under our oversight, their colonies will receive supplies faster, cheaper, and more reliably. Their children will not starve. Their hospitals will not run out of medicine. Their industries will not collapse. He turned to face Elias, not the human delegation, not the empty seats around them, but Elias specifically. Eye to eye, or as close as a Vireni's 6 eyes could get. This is not an attack. This is an upgrade. He sat down. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the voting began. Hegemony of Virenus, I. The president's voice was flat, procedural, but Elias caught the flicker of his carapace, satisfaction carefully hidden. Cathar Collective, I. One of the votes Thavas had bought. The Cathar owed the hegemony for 3 trade disputes resolved in their favor. Zerali Concordance, I. Elias' chest tightened. The Zerali had been human allies for 20 years, but allies had limits, and the hegemony had been leaning on the Zerali for 6 months. Trade sanctions, border disputes, the slow squeeze of economic pressure. Assembly of Tandu, I. Another bought vote, another species that had calculated the odds and decided humanity wasn't worth the cost. Elias counted. 7 ayes, 12, 23, 31. The human delegation sat in silence. 12 people, Elias and 11 others, all logistics officers, all veterans of the supply lines, all too old and too tired and too stubborn to quit. Sana Yusuf was in the gallery. He could feel her watching. He didn't turn around. 41 ayes, 2 nays. 12 abstentions. The abstentions were species who hadn't made up their minds, or who had made up their minds but didn't want to be on the record. Cowards, Elias thought, but he'd been an abstention once, years ago, on a vote about a species he didn't understand and a conflict he didn't care about. He understood. The human delegation has not yet voted. Coordinator Vance, the floor is yours. Elias stood. His left knee screamed. He didn't show it. He walked to the central podium, a simple platform elevated 2 meters above the floor, designed to make every speaker feel exposed. The Virani had designed it that way on purpose. When you stood on the podium, every eye in the chamber was on you. Every delegate could see your hands shake if your hands shook. Elias' hands didn't shake. He placed his datapad on the podium. The cracked screen glowed in the cold blue light. Delegates, he said, I'm not going to give a speech. A ripple of movement through the chamber. Surprise, confusion. A few delegates leaned forward. I'm going to read something. He tapped the datapad. Service record, Maria Chen, Human Logistics Command, service number 447-289-12, enlisted age 19, years of service 28. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone reading a cargo manifest, because that was what he was doing, a cargo manifest of the dead. Assigned to 3rd Supply Flotilla, New Teju route. Total deliveries, 1,247. Total cargo moved, 94,000 metric tons. Total lives sustained, approximately 47,000 colonists across 12 years. He paused. Date of death, standard year 2347, day 189. Cause, plasma conduit ruptured during contested zone transit. She returned to the cargo bay to stabilize the load. The conduits arrived. The colony survived. Maria Chen was 47 years old. The chamber was silent. Even the translators had stopped humming. The delegates had switched to their own languages, listening without the filter of translation. Service record, David Park, Human Logistics Command, service number 447-312-04. Enlisted age 22, actually 22, he lied, he was 20. Years of service, 17. Elias didn't look up from the datapad. He didn't want to see their faces. Assigned to 6th Breadbasket Run, Corinth 3 route. Total deliveries, 891. Total cargo moved, 52,000 metric tons. Grain, seed. The things colonies need to eat. Date of death, standard year 2344, day 302. Cause, cargo container shift during hard burn. He held the release valve until the container was secure. The ship survived. David Park was 39 years old. He could hear breathing now, not his own. Someone in the gallery, Sana, maybe, or one of the other old logistics officers. Service record, Jana Okonkwo, Human Logistics Command, service number 447-155-73, enlisted age 18, years of service 26. Assigned to 4th Medical Run, multiple colonies, total deliveries 1,894, total cargo moved 18,000 metric tons, medicine, vaccines, the things that keep children alive. Date of death, standard year 2349, day 117. Cause: radiation exposure after shielding failure. She finished her shift and filed her reports before she collapsed. The next shift knew exactly what to do. Jana Okonkwo was 44 years old. A sound from the gallery, a sob quickly stifled. Elias kept reading. Service record, Suleiman Paz, Human Logistics Command, service number 447-523-41, enlisted age 21, years of service 31. Assigned to second water run, multiple colonies, total deliveries 2,341, total cargo moved 156,000 metric tons, water processors, pumps, filtration systems. Date of death, standard year 2352, day 44. Cause: reactor hit during contested zone transit. He diverted power from life support to engines. The grain arrived. The colony ate. Suleiman Paz was 52 years old. He stopped. The chamber was silent. Even the Vireni were still, their carapaces frozen, their 6 eyes fixed on the old human at the podium. Delegates, Elias said, I have 43 more service records to read, one for each colony the hegemony wants to dismantle. He tapped the datapad. Elena Vasquez, age 41, radiation, same incident as Jana, she made it to the airlock. She could have survived. 73% chance, the medics said. She stayed to seal the reactor instead. Chen Wei, age 36, cargo container fell on him, safety cable snapped, manufacturing defect. The cable had been flawed for 20 years, waiting for the wrong combination of weight and stress. Chen was the wrong combination. Margaret O'Brien, age 59, heart attack during a supply run. She'd been ignoring symptoms for months. Her last log entry said cargo secured, proceeding to destination, ETA 14 hours. She died 4 hours later. The ship arrived on time. Marcus Webb, age 33, boarding action. He was a cargo loader, not a soldier. But when the raiders came, he locked the cargo bay and held the door. The supplies made it. Marcus didn't. Priya Singh, age 29, navigation error. The maps were wrong, the route was wrong, and she took the wrong turn into Vireni space. They held her for 11 months. When she came back, she weighed 34 kilos and couldn't speak for 3 weeks. She was back on the job in 4 months. She died 2 years later on a routine run, engine failure, no survivors. Her last word was cargo. Elia's voice didn't crack, it didn't waver. It was the voice of someone reading numbers from a screen, because that was what he was doing, and because if he let his voice crack, he would never stop. Delegates, I have been doing this job for 31 years. I have signed 1,847 death notifications in the last year alone. I have attended funerals on 47 colonies. I have held the hands of widows and orphans and parents who outlived their children. He looked up. Thavas says this is an upgrade. He says the hegemony can run our supply lines faster and cheaper and better. He's probably right. The hegemony's ships are faster, their routers are smarter, their technology is better. He paused. But the hegemony has never delivered a cargo container through a contested zone with a boarding party on the hull and a reactor leaking coolant and a crew that hasn't slept in 72 hours. The hegemony has never looked at a map and said there's no route, and then found one anyway because the alternative was watching children go quiet. The hegemony has never lost 1,847 people in a single year and kept running because quitting wasn't an option. He picked up the datapad. I'm going to finish the records now. There are 43 left. It will take about an hour. You can vote while I read. The motion doesn't require the floor to be empty. He tapped the next record. Service record, Amira Hassan, Human Logistics Command. Enlisted age 17, she lied on her paperwork. Her mother was a logistics officer and she wanted to follow. Years of service, 22. The chamber stayed silent. Thavas's carapace flickered, red, amber, red again. Anger, frustration, something that looked almost like fear. President, Thavas said, this is a public records filing, the president said. His voice was flat, but his carapace was not. It had shifted to a pale gray, the Vireni color for listening. Council Regulation 47, Section 3, Paragraph 2. The coordinator is within his rights. Amira Hassan died at 39, Elias continued, delivering medical supplies to Corinth 7 during a plague. The supplies arrived. The colony quarantined successfully. 11,000 lives saved. Amira was exposed during the offload. She died 14 days later. Her last word was cargo. The Zerali delegate's head feathers were flat against her skull, the Zerali gesture for mourning. Service record, Tomas Reyes, age 47, engine explosion. He was in the engine room when it went. He had time to evacuate. He stayed to shut down the reactor. The ship survived. Tomas didn't. The Cathar delegate, the one who had voted aye, was staring at the floor. Service record, Fatima Al-Hassan, age 52, exposure. She was on a cold route, the heaters failed, and she gave her thermal blanket to a younger crew member. The crew member survived. Fatima didn't. Her last log entry said cold but cargo is fine. The assembly of Tandu delegate, another aye vote, had his manipulators folded in front of his face, the Tandu gesture for I was wrong. Elias kept reading. 23 records, 31, 40. The chamber was completely silent except for his voice. Calm, measured, reading the dead home. Service record, James Oduya. No, James is alive. He's in the gallery. He lost his left arm to a Virani raider in '92. He kept loading cargo with one arm while he bled out on the deck. The ship made it. James made it. He's 71 now, and he still works the supply lines because he doesn't know how to stop. He looked up. 47 records, 47 colonies, 1,847 logistics personnel lost in the last year alone, 11,423 civilians lost over 31 years. He set the data pad down. The hegemony wants to dismantle our industrial capacity. They want to take our supply lines and run them better. They're probably right that they can, but they can't run them the way we run them. They can't run them with this. He touched his chest, where the photograph was, against his heart. This is not an upgrade. This is a trade. You give us efficiency. We give you the names of the dead. You give us speed. We give you Maria and David and Jana and Suleiman and all the others who died moving boxes so children wouldn't starve. He looked at Thavas. I don't care if your ships are faster. I don't care if your routers are smarter. I care about the 1,847 people we lost last year. I care about the 11,423 civilians who died because a supply line failed. I care about the photograph in my pocket and the faces on it and the fact that I am the only one still breathing. His voice was quiet now, almost a whisper. You can't beat that with a vote. You can only join it or get out of the way. He stepped down from the podium. His knee screamed. He didn't limp. He walked back to his seat and sat down. The chamber stayed silent for a long moment. Then the Zerali delegate stood. Concordance withdraws its aye vote. Motion to reconsider. The Cathar delegate stood. Collective withdraws. Motion to reconsider. The Tandu delegate stood. Assembly withdraws. Motion to reconsider. One by one, the delegates stood. 41 ayes became 31, became 21, became 12. Thavas's carapace flickered through every color Elias had ever seen, red, amber, blue, purple, gray, black, before settling on a dull, flat brown, the color of defeat. The motion fails for lack of votes, the president said. The industrial capacity of human outer colonies remains under human control. He paused, his carapace was still pale gray, listening. The council will observe a 15-minute recess. The chamber erupted in noise, delegates talking, translators crackling, the sound of 412 species processing what they had just heard. Elias sat in his seat. The photograph was warm against his chest. He didn't celebrate, he didn't smile, he didn't do any of the things the other species expected him to do, the fist pump, the victory speech, the triumphant walk out of the chamber. He sat. After a moment, Sana Yusuf came down from the gallery. She was 71 years old. Her left arm ended at the elbow. Her eyes were wet. You did it, she said. No, Elias said. We did it, all of us. Maria and David and Jana and Suleiman, all of them. He pulled out the photograph. 12 faces, 23 years old, 11 dead. I'm going home now, he said. To Earth. No, to the supply lines. We lost 1,847 people last year. There's work to do. He stood up, his knee hurt, he didn't care. He walked out of the chamber, past the Zerali guard with her respectful feathers, past the cold blue lights and the obsidian walls, past the bench where Thavas had sat and offered his courtesy. The corridor was empty. Elias Vance walked down it, alone, the photograph in his pocket, the dead in his heart, and the supply lines still running.